Walter White has been dodging accountability since the day he cooked his first batch, and from that point on, it's just been lies upon lies, from drug manufacturing, kidnapping, and even murder. But no matter how bad things got, he always felt that he had some justification towards it, and it took him losing everything but a single barrel of money for him to admit that he simply just likes to cook meth.
I liked it.
And had it not been for a random broadcast of his old college buddies essentially discrediting him, the series would have ended with Walter White giving up in a bar. But instead what we got was one of the greatest finales to a TV show ever put on screen, because we see our main character do what he set out to do from the very first episode, which was to ensure that his family was provided for long after he's gone. And not only that, but he also got justice for his brother-in-law, freed his ex-partner, and in a very rare occasion, he got a chance to die on his own terms. But in my opinion, that was all out of pure spite, and it really makes you wonder, what would have happened if Walter never seen that broadcast? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. Welcome to the Heisenverse, a series where I make a change somewhere in the Breaking Bad timeline to see how that one change ripples throughout the entire universe. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. And since we're talking about TV show finales, comment down below which series you think had a better finale than Breaking Bad, just so I know it's real. But now, let's get into it. After waking up in the middle of the night from his wedding ring falling off his finger, Walter looks up at the newspaper clippings on the wall, which, to him, is the closest thing to family photos that he can get since going on the run. But with every headline saying the worst about Skylar, he knows that she's in a bad way and it's all his fault. And the fact that his cancer is slowly withering him away, he knows that he doesn't have much time to try and make things right. So while staring at the barrel of money inside the cabin, he decides to fit every dollar he can inside the small box to at least get that to his family. Because that barrel and so much more is what he gave up his entire life for. And if he's gonna die out here, all this can't be for nothing. So when the next day rolls around, Walter takes his money, which couldn't be more than 100,000 of the 7 million that he has, and he walks miles through the snow just to get to a local bar. And when he's able to make it to a payphone, after bribing the bartender for help, a call is made to Walter Jr. at his school. And while trying to explain himself for everything that he's done, his words just come out as broken sentences and heavy breathing. But what comes out clear as day would be the plan that he has to send them money. And after everything that he's done to them, from having Hank killed to leaving them to deal with the fallout of his choices, they want nothing to do with Walter. And Junior makes it perfectly clear that he just wants him to die already and to just leave them alone. And that would be the last thing that his son says to him before hanging up the phone. So now, with no purpose, Walter White finally accepts defeat. And after unceremoniously calling the police on himself, he walks over to a bar and orders a drink while he waits for the cops to arrive. And with a small box of money by his side, it might as well be loose paper, because all of it, everything that he's worked so hard for, bled for, and even killed for, means nothing if his family doesn't want it. And with them choosing to struggle to pay bills than to even take a cent of his drug money, he really has nothing left. And with every sip that he takes, he thinks about where it all went wrong for him. And as much as he'd like to pin the blame on Jesse or Todd or even Saul, with all the time that he spent alone in a cabin, it's become undeniable that there's no one that he can blame but himself for his position in life. And maybe, had he just taken Elliot up on that offer to go back to Gray Matter, things could have been completely different. But it's far too late for regret at this point. And as he finishes up his drink, he can hear the police sirens in the background getting louder as they approach the bar. And similar to Jesse's random act of kindness to a homeless man on the street, Walter decides to give the bartender his box of money, and he would ask her, "Excuse me, do you have kids?" "Yeah, a little boy and a girl," the bartender says while polishing a glass. "Well, you can use this to take care of them," Walter says while sliding the box towards the bartender. Then after leaving a tip, he gets up and walks outside to meet the police. And the moment he takes one foot outside, there's at least 8 different police officers with guns drawn approaching the bar. And when they see him stepping out, they order him to put his hands up and to get on the ground. And with so many guns pointed at him, Walter complies, and he would slowly kneel down until he's lying flat on the snowy parking lot. And as the police go and surround and cuff Walter, he confirms his name to let them know that he is the person that they're looking for. And just like that, the 8.5-month manhunt for Walter Hartwell White is officially concluded. It takes 2 whole days for Walter to be extradited back to New Mexico. But before he even gets back into town, the news of Walter's arrest makes it to Marie, Skylar, and Flynn. And although the entire family is done with him, the two sisters still want to know why he did what he did. And not the bullshit excuse that he did it for family, but the real truth. Because if this was all for family, then why did Hank have to die? And why did he leave them when they needed him the most? That's the least that he owes Skylar and Marie. So once he was fully booked and put in the cell, the officers do the sisters a courtesy of having a special visit between them and Walter. Because since being put in cuffs and giving the officers his name, Walter has remained silent for days, and they're hoping that this visit could divulge any additional information, such as who he was working with and where exactly is Hank and Steve Gomez buried. And I would compare the reunion of Marie, Skylar, and Walter to how it was during the season finale of Better Call Saul. But before the sisters enter the room, Walter has been writing down his side of the story in front of several attorneys and police officers. And although he seems pretty helpless and downright pathetic, everyone in that room knows what he's done and do not feel an ounce of sympathy for him. And what he writes down was basically him taking full responsibility of the meth operation and claiming that he acted alone the entire time. And to his knowledge, Jesse was already killed by Jack, but not wanting to mention anyone else, he takes the blame for his death as well as Hank and Steve Gomez. And the last thing that he writes down is the coordinates to where they were buried. But not once did he ever mention the disappearer, Jack, Todd, or Saul. And when he was done with his statement, Walter slides the paper towards the attorneys, and he would just sit in defeat as he looks down at the ground, just waiting to get taken back to his cell. But when Skylar and Marie enter the room, Skylar stands by the door looking at her ex-husband who's almost unrecognizable. And she says in a sincere tone, "Hey, Walt." But Marie would follow up with what Skylar said by saying, "So, you're not dead after all." And Walter would slowly lift his head up and looking as if though he just seen a ghost as he stares back at Marie and Skylar from across the table. But now with his hair and beard grown out, he almost looks like a different person from the man that they used to know as a husband and a brother-in-law. And as they sit and stare at each other for what feels like an eternity, Marie looks at him with disgust while Skylar looks at him with pity. But Marie would be the main talker throughout this conversation as she says, "For 8 long months, you've been hiding out in God knows where while your family had to pay the price for your choices. And for what you did to Hank, I would say that I hope you die, but that's too easy a punishment for something like you. You deserve to suffer." She says, not even blinking once, almost like she's staring into his soul. But no matter what Marie says and all the insults that she hurls at him, Walter slowly puts his head back down as if though every word she said carried weight. Then she looks over at Skylar, who's holding back the tears, and she says to her, "Sky, you wanted to come down here to know the truth. Well, now's your chance. Go ahead and ask this piece of garbage why he did any of this. Go ahead." And that statement leaves the entire room silent because that's the question that everyone wants to know the answer to. And after a full minute of silence, Walter would finally lift his head back up to look Skylar directly in the eyes, as if though they're the only two in the room. And for the first time since being arrested, he speaks up and he says, "Skylar, I'm so sorry for the last conversation we had. I don't want that to be how you remember me. So ask the question, and I'll tell you the truth." And while she fights through the tears, she says, "Why, Walt? Why did you do it?" And as his eyes start to get glossy, Walter rotates his handcuffed wrist and he says to her, "All I've ever wanted was to make enough money for you and the kids, and I never thought things would get this bad. But the truth is, to cook was something that I liked, and I was good at it. But what happened to Hank, if I could trade places with Hank, I would do it in a heartbeat, Skylar." And as Walter and Skylar share a meaningful look, Marie chimes in by saying, "You had over 8 months to have the same fate as Hank, you lying two-faced coward. And since you weren't man enough to do it yourself, I hope you live a long life rotting in that cell. And Skylar and Flynn might not ever want to see you again, but trust and believe me, I will come here every day to visit you as many times as I can just to remind you of the low-life piece of garbage that you are." And as Skylar and Marie prepare to leave, Walter lifts his head up to look at Marie with a sympathetic gaze, but he ultimately says nothing as he just watches the two sisters exit the room. Picking up in the outskirts of Albuquerque, Jack, Todd, and the rest of the crew are doing their daily torture on Jesse by cleaning him with a fire hose. But once they head back inside, after cracking open a few beers, the news of Walter White's arrest will be all over the TV, and it causes the gang to be concerned with all that Walter knows. And although the news states that he claimed to have carried out the murder of the two agents alone, Jack and the rest of the crew wonder if he'll be a liability somewhere down the road. And with them stealing the majority of his money, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he'd rat them out just to get even. And Kenny would say, "Jack, let's be serious here. We all know that the feds don't really believe that he acted alone. I mean, him. And I'm sure that they're going to try to do anything short of freedom to get him to talk. So how long would it be until he wants to take a deal? And what happens when the cops come knocking at our door? I say we go and take care of him while we still can." But Todd is the only one to advocate that Walter is not a rat, and he would be the only thing standing between them and a blade to the neck. So for the time being, the gang watches Walter very carefully on the news as well as inside the prison, and they continue their own operation. Back over in Albuquerque, it's been a little over 5 weeks since Walter's arrest, and right now, Skylar and Junior are just finishing up packing. Because after taking the deal with the DEA, she also mentioned that men with masks showed up at her house while Walter was on the run. So to protect their family, they're actually on their way to witness protection to an undisclosed location. And as she considers visiting Walter one last time, she can't even look at him the same after what he's done and refuses to even be in the same room as him. So while her and the kids leave to their new beginning, she would instead just tell Marie to pass along the message, something that she has no problem doing. Because true to her word, nearly every weekend she goes to visit Walter just to remind him of what he did to his family. And with him accepting this as his punishment, every time that she comes to visit, he just sits there and takes the verbal abuse up until the day that he dies. And when that day does come, there's no redemption, no final words, just a series of coughs before his battle with cancer is lost. And that would be the ending of the once great Heisenberg, the man who had it all and died with nothing. Back over at Jack's compound, the entire gang is once again watching the news of Walter's death unfold. And considering that Lydia was pressuring them to take him out the picture, it seems that she's got exactly what she wanted without them ever having to lift a finger. Because I'd imagine that she's been a paranoid mess since Walter was put in cuffs, and with everything that he knows, it could have taken them all down very easily. And if it weren't for Todd and the respect that he had for Mr. White, Walter's fate would have been just the same as Mike's 9 guys. But now that he's no longer a factor, they continue to use Jesse as their meth cook for now until the foreseeable future. And that comes with occasional torture, lack of food, and consistent nightmares. But with the fear that something would happen to Brock if he suddenly just stopped, he has no choice but to do what they say and take whatever's thrown at him. But unlike the original, nobody's coming to save him, because other than his captors, no one even knows that he's alive. So in the end, everything that Walter and Jesse been through, all the murder, all the meth, and all the money, it was all for nothing. And although the blue meth will continue to flood the streets of Albuquerque with the name Heisenberg still being associated with it, at this point, what exactly is there to be proud of? 1 year later, we pick up in Omaha at a Cinnabon, and working the closing shift would be Gene Takovic, aka Saul Goodman. And with him not on anyone's radar since Walter turned himself in, through a series of cab rides and small talk, he was able to get Jeff and Buddy to be a part of a new operation. But not under threat of blackmail, but simply because scheming is just what he does. So a couple times a week, he and his new partners do a job where Gene gets a person drunk, Jeff takes him home and drugs him with some barbiturates, and Buddy goes into the house and takes pictures of their account information, and basically doing identity fraud. But one day, while meeting up with the lady of the night for some R&R, through some casual conversation, he finds out that this woman just came from Albuquerque, and us as the audience will quickly realize that this woman is actually one of Nacho's ex-girlfriends. So as they share a cigarette, he gets her to talk about what's new in his old town. And while she rambles on about old boyfriends and why she left in the first place, he sees her pull out a pipe and a tiny bag of blue meth. And right away, the memory of his partnership with Walter and Jesse comes to the forefront of his mind. But knowing that Walter's dead and Jesse is, well, he doesn't really know where he is. But after remembering their last encounter, he really doesn't want to know. And just like that, the curiosity of who cooked that meth is gone. And after the woman was good and high, her and Gene shared the next few hours together, but for a small fee, of course. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed another story from the Heisenverse. And I know this version doesn't exactly hold a candle to the original. In fact, I'd say it's more in line to the finale of Better Call Saul. But where Jimmy McGill was an expert in talk no jutsu, Walter White was more of a punching bag for his family. And what makes it worse is the fact that everything that he did basically amounted to nothing. And I gotta say, when I was writing this, I felt so bad for Jesse, because I think how his story would end is either with him taking his own life, or when he's no longer useful, I feel that Todd would just take Jesse out somewhere and put 2 in the back of his head. But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this what if? Did you like it? Is there anything that you'd change? And what's another what if that you'd like for me to cover? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. And if you'd like to get videos early, access to the Heisenverse Discord, and just support the channel in general, consider becoming a member down below in the channel. But with all that being said, my name is Merge. Later.